Good afternoon, everybody. I am Joshua Justice, the gallery coordinator, and on behalf of Mott Community College and the Mott's Fine Art Department, I'd like to welcome you all to Art Talk. Art Talk is a series of conversations with artists, educators, historians, professionals, and we would like to thank the Ballinger Trust for putting this all together. Today we have professor and painter Marvin Dabideen with us today. Welcome.
Guys.
How's it going?
Pretty good, Josh. Thank
Good.
you. It's great being here. It's a big full circle moment for me because I was a student just like you guys, and maybe one day you'll be here. It's my first art talk. I've been painting for a while, but so bear with me if I'm a bit nervous. But yeah.
2 seconds, sorry. So yeah, let's talk about your history. Now, you grew up in Trinidad, is that correct?
Yeah, I spent my first probably 18, 19 years in Trinidad and Tobago. It's in the Caribbean, last island on the chain. And then I migrated in 2003, right around after high school, and basically to pursue tertiary education. And Flint has been where I did most of that. I started off at Kettering for 1 year, following along a path that a lot of my cousins and my brother took as in engineering, but I soon realized I was not really interested in that path, and it was a humanities class at Kettering that kind of sparked the interest in me pursuing fine art, or at least exploring it.
Okay.
So I transferred to U of M Flint, and then I still followed through with like a more what my family wanted by following in the pre-med courses, and my exploration in art was just to explore and see where I fit in there. But I think after a while, I got the painting bug, and it's really where my interests lied. So I definitely explored educational paths, and I felt I needed to paint. So I consider myself a rational person, so I really initially thought, well, I wondered if it was an addiction of some sort that I needed, but it really was sort of therapeutic for me, and maybe that's what I needed at the time. But
That
painting,
creative outlet?
Yeah, definitely some creative, because I felt in the sciences it was just mainly regurgitating information and trying to memorize it all the time, and there was not a creative path available at the time. So I've always drawn, but I must say that it's when I walked around in Mott for the first time is when I realized, hey, people are actually painting still. I thought it was something of the past. And I'm not sure which order I took, but I took art history, and I really loved art history, you know. And, right up here at Mott, and back then Mott and U of M had that partnership going. So you took your early art classes here, and then you finished up at U of M. And as artists, we look for signs and symbols, you know, to lead you on your path. And I remember taking art history, and I was hearing this faint sound in the distance, and so I followed the sound. And then I turned the corner and I realized there was a big steel drum orchestra there.
All right.
So this painting is definitely a steel drum. And if you guys didn't know, steel drum was invented in Trinidad and Tobago. And so in a way, I felt like it was a sign that I was on the right path. So,
Nice.
Yeah.
So your childhood, were you much of an artist growing up besides drawing? Were there other artistic outlets that you pursued?
No, I basically draw to pass time, like in high school and stuff. But I never considered it at all as a career path. Back in Trinidad too, you're sort of streamlined culturally to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer sort of thing. So I kind of followed that path. And I'm hoping now that there's a lot more opportunities there for people to explore different fields rather than just to streamline what is expected of you culturally. In a way.
A lot of cultural influence saying that you have to follow a certain career path.
And I think I did well academically too, and I went to an all-boys school for high school, and yeah, I think we were all sort of, if you were to ask, I remember someone from Miami University came to our school one time, and he went around asking what path are we, and everybody basically said engineering. So we was sort of like streamlined there, because the University of the West Indies, which the Trinidad campus, focused on engineering. Whereas in Jamaica, there's medicine, and Barbados had law. So it's like all of us were sort of wired, or kept thinking, well, maybe that's our path in life. Well, we never really thought outside the box, really. But yeah.
So once you decided to pursue your career in artistic education, was there a lot of pushback from your family and your friends and whatnot, or were they pretty accepting?
No, it was definitely, it still is culturally difficult for me to say I'm an artist. You know, for now, I think I am at a point where I'm a little hopeful that I teach. Finally, so it is somewhat respectable that I'm teaching at a college and stuff, but it's almost like a secret. Being an artist is almost like my something I don't talk about. It still is something I keep to myself, and hopefully that changes. But you know, in recent years, I was just in survival mode. After grad school, you know, you're in a lot of debt. My car broke down right after grad school too, so I was kind of stuck in Grand Rapids. And I think around 2022 is when I got out of that survival mentality, and I was able to apply for jobs and get a new car, be more flexible with applying for shows and stuff like that. So yeah.
Nice.
I did enjoy Grand Rapids though. It was cool. And
what's the art scene like there compared to here? How different is it?
Well, I think here's when my grassroots art scene started, and I think that's what I missed in Grand Rapids a bit. There is something, but I never really got too much involved there. But the grassroots scene in Flint, I was part of the Creative Alliance, and we would meet up in Churchill's like every Wednesday in the evening and have meetings. A lot of poets and musicians and visual artists got together, and we would plan shows, and that sort of gave me experience in having exhibits and curating shows, and I owe a lot to that experience there, being around other creative people in Flint. And I also did a Red Ink residency for a few years. I think it was like the second revival of Red Ink maybe, and so that also gave me experience in terms of exhibiting and being an artist as well. So Flint was definitely where my core development as an artist was. And in terms of Grand Rapids, there's a lot of, well, there's Art Prize, of course, which was great every year. Artists from all over the world, the whole city became like a gallery.
It's amazing.
And I really enjoyed the concept of everybody being welcome to exhibit their art. And even the highest of the high fine artists too, they would have the jury prize and then the community prize. So I love the concept of it too. And so it was great being in that city. And then being there from 2012 to like 2024, I saw the city grow and change in so many ways, culturally, infrastructurally. There would be buildings going up, and I would still be struggling with a painting, and the buildings would be complete, and I'm still working on a painting. So it was interesting to see such positive growth in a city. And I know there was a gallery I worked with. I worked with Spiral, which was a fellow colleague at Kendall. And, in terms of my education, I went out to Kendall to get my master's after U of M, and that's how I ended up in Grand Rapids. And I worked at Spiral Gallery, which was owned by one of my colleagues at Kendall, and then I worked with Muse Gallery, which they're still doing great stuff today. And I sort of invited like the artists I knew here. One of my curatorial shows was Flint City Artists. And then the last one I did was Reuniting, which was I had friends from Grand Rapids and Flint combined in one show. And then the first one I did was Pure Flint, which was a sort of because of the water crisis that happened. And I really wanted to have that dialogue with the cities by bringing Flint artists within a different environment as well. So yeah.
How important was having that community of artists around you for your growth as an artist?
It was great. I mean, I encourage all students to think like that. Like create gangs, create your covens, support one another. And it was easy for me to like say, call up, hey guys, I want to put a show together. And so it was almost like having a barbecue and you just invite a bunch of friends, but instead you just have an exhibit and I helped hang the show and with some colleagues of mine, and that was the mentality behind it too. And curating came about because I couldn't transport my own artwork, so it's almost like, let me just get there and everybody else would bring their artwork to me.
Yeah,
and it was a way of networking and keeping in touch with my artist community from Flint as well. So
because you tend to paint on the bigger side with some of these pieces.
yeah, some of these paintings I had to chop in half because I had a Chevy S10, but after grad school my S10 broke down, and so like I was stuck with a bunch of big paintings and I didn't have a vehicle to like transport it, and so yeah, I chopped some of these paintings down. Now I paint fairly smaller. I would say some of these bigger paintings were definitely from the end of grad school there, when I was painting bigger. And I'd say when in grad school you experiment, see what it is like to paint on a bigger scale, you know.
So you had a couple other series leading up to this one, and even this one kind of more from Antillean Passage to the Blue Hour. How, like, let's go through the pieces on the wall and kind of dissect them a little bit. Like, what do they mean to you?
Yeah, I think this series of work started like at the end of grad school, and it really is about exploring and getting more personal, exploring your past. And to me, it was a bit therapeutic in a way, and I kind of see history through the lens of the hero's journey. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of the hero's journey and the monomyth. And I use that narrative structure in terms of how I look at history and my personal life too. It's a therapeutic journey for me, and I see how throughout history there is ordeals people face, and then you're able to transform, rise above it all, the ordeal, get out of that abyss, and you can be creative and innovative. And as Caribbean folks, like being innovative in terms of carnival, this is more like the festivity wall, inventing the steel drum, because during colonial times, I think they prohibited the use of skin drums and festivities because they taught mass gatherings and the drumming was a means of communicating. So to avoid that, they prohibited that, and just due to that prohibition, they found other means of making music. And I think the interesting thing about Trinidad is that the oil industry was there, and there were a lot of discarded like oil drums, and that's where the steel drum comes from. So I think it's an innovative thing to take waste product and make something beautiful out of it. You know? In terms of exploring my past, I do feel there are parts of it that echo where I was in my life too. Even though it wasn't, I would say, as severe, but there are specific paintings that echo where I was in life, how I felt in a way.
Right.
Like after grad school, you sort of feel like you're a slave to the system in a way. You owe so much, and your life becomes sort of stagnant and routine-like. And then COVID hit as well, so it's like you see a lot of people passing away, and so it's almost like you're surviving in a way. And so I could talk about specific artworks later on, but then when I paid off my debt, I call that one depth 3, and it really is like you need some sort of supernatural power to get to where you were at. So I kind of, that was a play of when I paid off my student loans and stuff, and was able to be more flexible finally. So that was a big achievement in my life so far, you know. And I would say, It is a narrative of how the Caribbean was, it starts off with the indigenous, then it starts with the colonial Columbus visiting, Caribs Leap. In terms of history, that was an obscure part of history I never learned about, but it was when it happened in the island of Grenada, and it was the Caribs who were a bit rebellious, the tribe, and they were fighting against the colonial oppression. And instead of being captured or murdered, they chose to like commit suicide by jumping off that cliff. And I think you see it in a lot of indigenous stories where they choose that route. And so it almost like it is a path of where you have to adapt and survive at times sometimes, you know. But it is a part of history I never knew about. And I could talk more about the artwork later if that's necessary, but yeah. Does that answer?
Yeah. Well, how important was it to, as you were going through this, you know, you get one little piece of information, and then you explore it a little more, and then like going down these rabbit holes of, and then incorporating that into your art.
Yeah, definitely. Like I took ideas from my reading in psychology, philosophy, and then being introduced to that historical period, Caribs Leap, was true video art by another artist, Steve McQueen, who went on to make some really great movies like 12 Years a Slave. He did Hunger and Shame. Almost like his first 3 movies are like considered masterpieces. And he is from the Caribbean as well, and he works in the UK. So it's like, it's great, like art itself can inform you of certain aspects of history that were sort of hidden. And that's basically what you do as an artist, to uncover aspects of history that are covered over sometimes. And sometimes it's only those in power who write the history. So I think a lot of my art is based around research. And so, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, and then you include not only the history, but kind of the folklore and the mythology of a lot of the...
I would say the one thing I didn't really talk about, in this series, I haven't touched on folklore just yet. And I think I will be doing that in the near future. This one is more history, and then carnival. Which carnival is based when slavery was abolished and the slaves were free. They started mimicking the masquerade parties of the French plantation owners. And then from mimicking, they began to be innovative and come up with their own things, you know. So yeah, I'll leave that open for more discussion. But this is definitely carnival.
Okay.
And then like Moko is I don't know if I'm straying off the path, but it is a traditional carnival character that is based on an African spirit or deity that was he had long legs and was able to rise above and look out for danger up ahead. And I just heard the phrase that he walked across the Atlantic to sort of take care of the enslaved people. And so just that journey of the walking across the Atlantic sort of inspired those paintings, and then that same one there too. I had this narrative of, I remember watching the movie Amistad, where a lot of slaves were thrown overboard in the opening scene, and it's very, it's brutal opening scene, and I just imagine this narrative of their spirit being able to rise above the water, and that image of them walking across the Atlantic, transforming in that process as well. So yeah.
So you incorporate a lot of the history of Trinidad, but then you also include, you know, some of your friends.
Some of my friends, yeah, and these are all friends I grew up with: Keon, Riaz, and Videsh, and then myself over there. And I realized my 3 oldest friends sort of they represent the segments of Trinidad society in a way. There's a lot of Afro-Caribbean people of African descent, and then Indo-Caribbean people where my ancestors come, where after slavery was abolished, the British brought indentured laborers from India to the islands to work on like the sugarcane fields and stuff, and that's where my ancestry came into play. And a lot of these images are based on some families held on to that, their creed, their religion practice as well. Riaz was of Muslim background, and then my buddy here is Videsh is of Hindu background.
Okay.
And all those, I can go more into depth as to the imagery there. This is based on a festival called Jose, which we celebrate in the Caribbean. And it is a Muslim festival, and they basically build a float of a Muslim temple, a mosque, and everybody joins in the parade, and they parade it to the ocean, and the waves sort of destroy the temple. So I never really, I thought it was interesting that festivity, and I think it sort of relates to my personal view of my friend as well, him being an entrepreneur. So it's like multiple levels I kind of used the paintings for, because he would start a lot of businesses and then he would stop it, start again.
Yeah.
So I kind of looked at that from a personal level. I wanted to incorporate aspects that my favorite painter, Henri Rousseau, had a painting called Portrait Landscape, myself, Portrait Landscape, and that's where these series came from, where I tried to incorporate landscape and portraiture together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do have historical tidbits in there as well. And I also incorporate geography. A lot of my interest lies within psychology and geography. So a lot of the cloud patterns in the paintings themselves are different islands in the Caribbean chain as well. And then that one has India sort of fading into the background.
Okay.
It is a temple that an indentured laborer built out in the Gulf as a substitute to do their ritual because the Ganges was on the other side of the world. Mm-hmm. So they sort of built that little temple like a spiral jetty, sort of like a land art piece. And so they could do their rituals within the open sea in the Caribbean versus as a substitute for not being able to be in India and the Ganges River, which is a sacred river for the Hindus as well. Yep.
So you mentioned, your inspiration for this. Who else, like what other artists do you look up to, and who else has inspired you in your works? Well,
actually here in Mott, I studied under John Dempsey, and he had a lot of magazines and books around. And somehow I picked up a magazine and I realized this artist who was on the cover was working in Trinidad. So Peter Doig and Chris O'Feely, I sort of paid attention to those guys, but they're pretty well-renowned contemporary artists who lived in Trinidad for like 20 years. After they were awarded a residency, they decided to stay for many years, and they created work based about their experiences in Trinidad. So I kind of paid attention to them over the years. As well as Neo Rausch. He's a German artist, and I think when I was here in school, the Leipzig Academy, led by Neo Rausch, was probably like at the forefront of painting in terms of innovative contemporary painting at the time. So definitely I look to them. Of course, I said Henri Rousseau is my one of my favorites, and he's a self-taught artist from the turn of the century, France. And of course, I looked at a lot of Caribbean artists as well. There's Edouard Duval-Carré, and he's a Haitian artist. And he painted a lot of blues as well. And then Chris O'Feely did a lot of blue paintings based on the nighttime scenes in Trinidad. And of course, I was influenced by Picasso's blue period. Because when he was down and out, he painted a lot of, which is my favorite Picasso period, actually. The blue period that he had, so yeah.
So you incorporated the blue period into the Blue Hour.
Yeah, and I'm hoping I can get out of the blue period now. I'm at a more hopeful period in life, and
explain what the Blue Hour is for those that
Yeah,
don't know.
Actually, one of my students wrote a paper on a Scandinavian artist, and the photograph was called the Blue Hour. And the Blue Hour, I think if you do photography, you know, there's the magic hour, there's the golden hour, and I think there is a blue hour that I never knew of. And it is that period where the sun goes down, everything's sort of blue, and it's sort of like this liminal space, and it's sort of like an in-between period, and it's mysterious. It has a bit of mystique to it. And I think sifting through all the aspects I wanted to cover as a painter, studying the history, I wanted to tie my paintings, and I think probably the blue color would keep it together, make it seem cohesive, because all of it is so diverse in a way. So I kind of incorporated that idea of it being in that blue hour period where it's in between. And I know the Caribbean sort of, it geographically is a sort of like an in-between space between the East and West, the continents and stuff. So yeah, that liminal,
That twilight hour kind of.
yeah, sort of plays on that idea of being in between, not fully here or there yet.
Yeah.
And then, if I should expand, I kind of looked at writers and philosophers from the Caribbean, and one philosopher in particular was Edouard Glissant from the island of Martinique. He's a French island, and he came up with this idea of archipelagic thinking versus continental thinking. And I think part of my delving into history is that we have a sense of lost history. Like after slavery, after the indentured labor that happens, we don't have any like real historical roots. It's sort of lost during that period. So part of my painting of history is sort of like I knew where a starting point for me and future generations to come. Just looking at my family, how diverse it is now too. My nieces and nephews, and I just want to sort of be like that historian in a way that they know where they come from and don't forget where they come from in a way. And there's always this search for identity when you don't have that history, right? And so archipelagic thinking proposes that it's always fluid, whereas continental thinking is more of a static thing. And we see that a lot in certain countries where there's a threat of incoming people changing things and stuff like that. But I think archipelagic thinking proposes the idea of you have enough sense of self that you're not threatened by things, and you can experience things without even making it part of your system, or you can take what's good and dispel what's bad in a way. So it's a bit fluid like that. That's my interpretation of it in a way. Yeah.
So you also, as a professor here, you teach art history.
Yep.
Why do you feel that it's important to, delve into the history of other artists, whether or not like you're going to, emulate or mimic kind of their styles? Why is it important to see everybody else's styles?
I think part of the advice is, especially as a student, is to incorporate as many. Part of what we do as artists is take little tidbits from what we like from different artists, and we put it together, right? And then we make it our own in a way. And I think part of contemporary art is trying to find something distinctive, especially if you go to like get your master's, and part of it is getting personal and probably taking ingredients from your home country or where you come from, part of your upbringing, and incorporating aspects of what you like from different artists. Like for instance, definitely when I was painting, I started off painting a lot of portraiture, and so Lucian Freud was big in terms of trying to capture these poses that was not like really poses, but just a natural pose and they're sort of melancholic at the same time too. And then And then I love romantic landscapes as well. Even though I find painting landscapes very tedious and difficult for me, I wanted to incorporate portrait and landscapes in a way in terms of trying to be innovative and distinctive with what I'm doing. So yeah.
And you've kind of come full circle from, you know, the early history of Trinidad and whatnot, and to the final, well, next to the final piece is a self-portrait of you and kind of where you are now, but also incorporating your history. Can you explain that piece?
Yeah. Well, that was the first time I saw like sand and snow mix, because I'm so familiar with like beaches coming from the Caribbean. I never saw that mixture of snow before, and it was like a real mind-blowing experience, because the first time I saw the Lake Michigan was like in the middle of winter. I'm out in Muskegon, and that mix of sand and snow definitely made I don't know if uncanny is the word, experience for me. And I did incorporate like a little bit of the Caribbean landscape fading out, and this being my new landscape, and incorporating the elements of like snow being in there as well. So yeah, sort of like a post-Caribbean phase in my life. And these paintings are sort of like outlines, but there's many like gaps I can fill in with other paintings as well. And then the portrait before is my mother. I found a photograph of her as a teenager probably, and the interesting part of that painting to me was the painted eyebrows. She said like her grandmother would paint her eyebrows. And you know, there's a lot of superstition in the Caribbean, and it's sort of like the water of the evil eye in a way. So that's how we see the uneven eyebrows on her as well. So I paint from a lot of found photographs, and definitely I would paint a lot more. I think it's important for me to paint family members as well. And then right now, I got married last year, and that's my wife and her cat. And that's a personal photo I took when we got home from the city hall and the reception. I had a little reception there. So it is sort of like a personal, I am on a hopeful note in life right now.
Nice.
So, you know.
So what advice do you have to the students and upcoming artists that, you know, we talked about how this wasn't your original path, but eventually finding yourself, like how would you help other students kind of find their paths?
I would say explore as many ideas and paths as possible. And I think part of why I chose art was it was a way of self-understanding and growth. And part of painting is like, what do you paint really? You kind of realize what you're interested in, because art is sort of this all-encompassing media sort of pathway, where if you're interested in geography, if you're interested in psychology, it kind of comes out in your artwork. And part of like my path from medicine to art was like medicine, they say it's the art and science of healing, right? So I thought, well, instead of the science of healing, I was more interested in art of healing. And I started like reading books on the mind-body connection. So there's a whole aspect of healing, part of medicine, that I think needs to be focused on in terms of education. And I realized the Walmart Harris, she recently opened a medical school that requires students to study art as well. She is a big supporter of the arts as well, and her experience being ill as well, and how art helped her. And I think everybody should at least get an associate's in art, because I think it helps you in terms of observation, observing yourself and the world around you. And even if you go into like scientific fields, I think the pathway is similar in the sense that you are looking at pattern recognition. And that idea of deep focus is something that's missing. And it is a skill that would come in handy in a way. And I know the world is changing, so yeah, definitely I think who knows what the future holds in terms of like AI, and there's aliens too, right? So,
yeah.
and it's amazing that art, like these fantastic movies from the 70s and stuff always warned us about these scenarios, Blade Runner, Alien. So within the zeitgeist, I see aliens and AI still being such at the forefront now that it's, it's really up in the air as to what path to take. And I try to pay attention to what's going on right now too. I was looking at art therapy as probably another focus.
Combining the two.
Yeah, because I do think art is a therapeutic tool to help us live better lives. And I'm just hesitant because it's a whole other master's degree that I think I'm done with school, you know. I'd rather just paint right now too. So teaching gets in the way of painting. So that's something Tim might can speak relate to as well. So I don't know, are we doing good on time?
Yeah, we're good. We got okay. So we have, you said that this was kind of your blue period. You're kind of,
Sure.
So what's the next, like, have you started working on your next kind of period, your next kind of hour, your next kind of, series?
It's definitely a more hopeful colors, I would say. And there's a new chapter in my life as my wife is expecting, and I'm hoping to get into folklore. Given my background, I would look at the dark side of folklore, but in terms of like creating paintings for like a nursery, I would probably, her aesthetic is definitely more cutesy as well. So that's definitely influencing me, and I'm hoping I could create something more cutesy along the realms of incorporating folklore, such as mermaids and other aspects of folklore from the Caribbean within that framework there as the immediate thing. I would also love to get into like documentary filmmaking too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean,
even if I were to interview like Flint artists and what the art scene here, because it's played such an important role in my development as well, Flint as a city.
I mean, you kind of glossed over it, but congratulations on the upcoming Wii one.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Just gotta
it is a new chapter, and balancing life and work there is another thing there too. So that would be a challenge, and that is something you have to do as artists. How do you balance painting and personal relationship too? I think a lot of folks don't understand your need for solitude at times as a creative person, and that gets in the way, causes issues at times. But just warn them probably, that you need solitude and time to be in the studio and produce. So yeah.
Yeah, some you time, some decompression time.
Yeah.
Very important. So, okay, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. Does anybody have any questions for Marvin?
All right.
Okay, so I'm kind of wondering what your process is like. So when you're starting off on a painting, are you doing like, do you just see something and you're just heavily inspired by it and you just start working, or do you do like we do, and we do a bunch of thumbnails and sketches and
I remember when I was in Dempsey's class, there was a computer there, and I would purposely be right next to the computer because I would get imagery from the computer, the internet, and there's so much material photographed there. And so yeah, either found photographs, like when it comes to relatives, or personal photos. I definitely love working from personal photos because I felt it comes easier than finding photos or people giving you photos to work from. Say you were to do commission work, I felt it's definitely, it feels easier when I take photos myself. And of course I'm inspired, like if I'm flipping through National Geographic and I see a cliff face, or I need a specific cliff face, like or a piece of landscape, I would definitely be looking out for that and incorporate that into my image. And other artists like Bill Viola, a lot of his still imagery, he's a video artist, but I incorporate a lot of his still images, like those figures with water cascading off of them, I direct direct from images from a video artist called Bill Viola. And so I get a lot of imagery from the internet and I incorporate it into new ways to fit the narrative that I'm working with. And definitely I'm inspired by reading. I think reading is important. I don't read as much nonfiction anymore, probably because I know the hero's journey and the monomyth. And similarly, movies, like I could predict what's going to happen next sometimes, but then there are those moments where it really surprises you. And I look for those moments where you're genuinely surprised and the creator does something really innovative, and I kind of take from that and try to incorporate it as well.
And I think, you know, you mentioned this earlier too. I think basically what he's saying too is the stuff he's doing is what you guys, if we don't spell it out to you, you might not realize that is, as an artist, that's research, right?
Yeah.
Research, when you hear the word, you think that it means you have to read a book. With art, it means whatever it takes. Sometimes it's going through looking for specific images. Yeah. Sometimes it's watching a favorite show that kind of puts you in you know, a creative. It's finding what you need to do. You can't just go home and suddenly expect the next time you come back to be inspired. And that, because that's what we have to do, is we have to find that interest in the various ways that we do. And yeah, so that was good to hear you say that.
For sure, yeah. I'm glad I'm an artist because I see it as my duty to go check out movies.
24/7.
Yeah, check out movies, read new books, and I love the library because you go to the new shelf, see what new ideas are out there, and yeah, I look forward to new movies and
keep that in.
Yeah, always. Everything you're doing in life, even at work too, you like even in sports, I'm more interested in how a coach, manager can change your team rather than the players themselves. And I try to, even if you're in the workplace, analyze, and you kind of look at pattern recognition throughout everything you're doing, and you keep that antenna on, see what the zeitgeist is, and part of like Jungian theory is that tapping into that collective unconscious at the moment. So yeah.
And if you guys aren't aware, we do have a pretty awesome library right here in the building, next to the main office here. So if you guys, ever want to do some research, it's open for you guys.
And we still have the magazines that inspired him in painting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of great books Dempsey recommended. He introduced me to William V. Dunning, who was his professor. And he's a great writer, and he wrote The Changing Images of Pictorial Space. And that's why I kind of experimented with a lot of space, and Dempsey himself experiments with space all the time, and I think that is something that has evolved throughout the history of painting, is how artists use space. So that's something I play with as well and pay attention to when I look at paintings. Does that answer your question, Mariah? Yeah? Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah.
The picture of the bat, I think it is that another picture from Carnival?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you from the Caribbean at all?
Am I from where?
The Caribbean at all? No? Anybody from the Caribbean here? No? Okay. Yeah, it is a traditional carnival character. Like the Monday, before Ash Wednesday is when carnival happens, and there's Monday and Tuesday. And then there's the traditional carnival characters, which the man bat, then the Moko Jumbi, which is the dancers on stilts, and then there's a fancy sailor. And this is not necessarily a fancy sailor, but I was doing research as to where does these traditional costumes originate from. And I found this great etching of a sailor from the British Navy, and he became a street performer. And a lot of it is so reminiscent of the carnival costume of the fancy sailor that I couldn't help but relate. Maybe they were influenced by this etching, which is an older etching, And I was thinking along the lines of how Batman is such an icon in culture today. And I was wondering if it's such an archetypal thing throughout different cultures. That idea of the bat. So yeah, doing research as to where this originated from is something I'd love to delve into. Where these characters originated from. Like I know Moko for sure is based on an African deity as a protective spirit. So yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you, Marvin, for your time today. Thank you for showcasing your art. We would also like to thank the Ballinger Trust for helping put this together. We'd also like to thank Media Services for all the magic that they do, the faculty and staff here. And yeah, have a great day.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
For helping me out. And thank you guys for coming. I appreciate it. Yeah, and if you